Welcome to the Defense and Aerospace Report. I'm Vago Muradian here in Northern Virginia, where we have just finished listening to a fascinating Coast Guard innovation panel sponsored by the Marine Technology Society. And we're honored to have with us the Deputy Commandant of the United States Coast Guard for Mission Support, Vice Admiral Sandra Stosz, and real groundbreaker. You were the first female superintendent of a service academy at the Coast Guard Academy up in New London. You were also Coast Guard Academy graduate and the first female flag officer from the Coast Guard Academy. It's a real honor to be talking to you, ma'am.
Oh, thank you very much, Vago. I'm very honored to be here. It's my first time on your program.
Thanks very much, and hope the first of many. I want to talk to you first. The Trump administration has put its first budget out. The Coast Guard looks like it averted what would have been almost an existential crisis in terms of budget. But you have a very, very flat budget. Tell us a little bit about what the priorities are within the budget that you guys have gotten out of the administration.
Well, we're very happy to be aligned with the administration. We have executive orders on border security, rebuilding the armed forces, cybersecurity. We fit into all that, and we're very happy with the way ahead. We're very excited about rebuilding and with getting to work with this new administration.
What are some of the priorities that you guys have? The budget is about flat, not as up certainly as the focus is on the Pentagon and elsewhere at Homeland Security. But what are the priorities you have within the amount of money that you guys have gotten?
Well, we've got great support for our priorities. We've got funding for 4 fast response cutters to continue that program. We've actually got seed money, $1 million or so, for a new fleet of inland construction tenders. We've got follow-on money for our polar icebreaker. We're very excited about that. And we've got the money for the offshore patrol cutter to buy long lead time materials for the second one and to start on the first one. So we're very excited about our acquisition priorities.
You mentioned acquisition. That falls certainly firmly under your purview. Obviously, as mission support, everything that supports the operator falls under your purview within the very clever arrangement of the Coast Guard, actually, on how you guys are very logically grouped. This event here was to continue to build bridges between the Coast Guard, discuss innovation. The organization, founded in 1963, MTS, was designed much more around oil, gas, and the commercial industry. Talk to us about the partnerships you want to build with commercial industry as the Coast Guard seeks to do, as Admiral Zukunft always jokes, do everything with nothing, not just more with less.
Absolutely, Vago. Thanks for that question. We can't do it all on our own. We've got to partner. It's a necessity, especially when it comes to innovation. We can't work in a silo. We don't have the people talent. We've got great people in the Coast Guard, but we don't have all the people we need. We're never going to get 100% of the funding we want, so we're going to have to leverage our partnerships. We're very excited about the partnerships we have within DHS, with our Office of Science and Technology. We're very excited about partnerships with the Coast Guard Academy and the Research and Development Center, also with the national labs. We're leveraging all those partnerships. We're leveraging the strengths of all the government, the private sector, our industry partners. We have project resident offices around down in for the National Security Cutter, where we're working with the Navy to leverage their contracting talent and their NAVC talent down there. So we couldn't do our job without the partnerships.
Do you? What are some of the innovation priorities? We heard from Commander Howell, who's heading the innovation cell. We heard from Commander Popeil, who is the head of the fascinating Evergreen strategic planning process you have, and I want to ask you about that a little bit. But in terms of innovation priorities, where is the Coast Guard leadership looking at those breakthroughs, particularly for you, who's trying to maintain an incredibly aged fleet? If you look at the inland buoy tender fleet, you're pushing 70 years on some of those ships. Average age is something like 58 years or something. So it's good that the open ocean fleets are being recapitalized, but you guys have a vast series of challenges. Where are you trying to find those innovative breakthroughs?
Well, a lot of the innovative breakthroughs in my world of work are looking at the process arena. So we're looking, for instance, at a buoy tender product line. We're looking at ways to consolidate the construction of our buoy tenders so that we can better deliver that service, so that the construction tenders have faster access, better quantities, and have the supplies when they need them. So we're looking at process improvements. We're looking at technologies. We're looking at leveraging over-the-horizon technologies that aren't out yet. You've heard of the CubeSats that we're exploring with, working with DHS S&T on those. We're also looking at our small unmanned aerial surveillance vehicles. You've seen the Coast Guard's Cutter Stratton deploying the UAS in the last deployment. That vehicle vehicle was responsible for helping interdict a significant amount of drugs on that last patrol. We're also got money in the 17 budget, doubled down on our acquisition for our appropriation for R&D to look at larger Predator-type unmanned vehicles. So we're excited about all those innovations.
And that would be obviously for broader area surveillance, which is some of the things you have to do
Yes.
for the drug interdiction mission. In terms of the Evergreen strategic planning process, talk to us a little bit about that, because what folks know about what the Office of Net Assessment in the Pentagon does. Folks know what each of the other services has. But it's interesting that this Coast Guard office has actually existed for decades now. That it's not a new thing. And Commander Popeil made the joke that as an aviator, his strategic horizon is 3.5 hours until he runs out of gas. I think he's selling it a little short. But how important is this process? How does it work? And what are the benefits that it's delivered to the Coast Guard leadership?
This strategic planning process, the long range, is very important. Otherwise, we in the Coast Guard are a semper paratus, always ready organization. We respond to disasters, to needs. We need to look for the long term. We need to take a break once in a while, empty our minds, and stretch. We need to create the culture of stretching, to think beyond the horizon, beyond when you run out of gas, so that you've got a alternative for when that eventuality happens. So this process started with Admiral Allen, a former commandant. You probably know him well, and he delivered this program to the Coast Guard way back in the mid-'90s. I was on in 1998, the very first Evergreen consortium, and we delivered a maritime domain awareness out of that. That concept came from the Evergreen program, and you can see where that's gone over the years. So we can't take our eyes off the distant view, and we're very proud to be a leader in the government in that area.
What are some of the things, the priorities you guys are working on? One of the challenges I think that Commander Popeil talked about was, we have to be transparent, and you guys are transparent, but there are also some things that you're working on that you can't maybe talk about as publicly. But what are some of the priority efforts? What's your eye on as you, as a senior Coast Guard leader, are looking forward 20 years? What are you guys looking at there?
So 20 years out.
Or 5, or whatever horizon you want to use.
So some further horizon out, though. Our concept of operations, I think, is going to change some. Now, that's an operational thing. That's not even in my domain, but I'm looking at how I can prepare for that from the mission support side. So right now, for instance, I'm looking at clustering home ports. So these new assets coming out, these fast response cutters and national security cutters, offshore patrol cutters, they used to be able to be stationed in one port here, one port there. We have to, for maintenance reasons, cluster them to achieve the savings, if you want to call it that, or the cost avoidance of the maintenance. So we're looking at that. We're looking at how we can leverage our assets and deploy them maybe beyond what they were initially designed for. Maybe some of these fast response cutters need to be going down into the deeper Caribbean to pursue threats in the transnational organized crime area that we need to expand to be able to meet. So we're looking at how we can support the operators on responding to meet the needs of a changing Coast Guard as threats emerge and arise from all vectors.
The Coast Guard oversees the nation's vast, both inshore, inland, and offshore aids to navigation. That's critical to the maritime arteries of the nation, but also recreational boaters. I benefit from that, every time I'm out. Talk to us about the challenges and the kind of planning you have to do in terms of long lead that to cope with these changes budgetarily, physically, moving of installations. Miami sea level rise is an issue there. Scientists are talking now about Antarctic melt and how that's driving it. You guys have noticed large changes in that there. What are the kind of thinking and planning you're doing for the strategic long range on this?
That's a great question. So when I first took this job about 2 years ago, one of the first things I did was sit down with my engineers, and I said to them, hey, what are we looking at for clustering these home ports? I just talked to you about clustering. Hey, now that's more risk I'm putting in each home port with more assets there. And am my piers going to be there? Are my shore facilities going to be there? Or am I going to see rising tide? I've been working with partnering with NOAA. They've got models that show where the rising tide will have the most impact. We're looking at an analysis of all of our shore facilities to make sure that we can withstand natural disasters of any kind, including climate change and rising tide. So we have to be looking at strategic decision making on where we're going to put our assets and how we're going to rebuild our shore infrastructure.
Now I have to ask you about something about Icebreakers. I'm a fan of Icebreakers. Anybody who knows me knows that. We visited Healy in December. That was an honor. Got to see Polar Sea, which was tied up. Polar Star had just gotten underway, going back to the Antarctic. And when you were a 1982 Coast Guard Academy graduate, you were aboard Glacier, which was an ex-U.S. Navy icebreaker that you served on. Tell us what that experience was like, because that was definitely an older generation of ship that was in service.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for asking that question, because it brings me back to when I was young. And we all like to think back to when we were 22. My first ship coming out of the Coast Guard Academy was the Coast Guard cutter Glacier, which had been scheduled to go into a decommissioned status, but the Coast Guard decided to get one more year out of her. So that's how old she was. She was, 30 some odd years old at the time. And this was the last deep freeze to Antarctica that I was on before it went into a special decommissioned status. So anyway, it was super. When I get asked what the best job I ever had in the Coast Guard, I say it was a Coast Guard cutter Glacier, my first billet as an ensign. It was an old ship, but you know what? It taught me the importance of maintaining things so they don't run into the ground on you. It told me the importance of people, how good people can make old things work. But it taught me the importance of investing in the future and how we need to be constantly looking forward to what the new needs are and to be budgeting to recapitalize our ships so we don't have to deal with a ship like the Glacier, which went across the equator with the 2 engines out of 10 and with 1 ship service generator and very little energy or power. We almost didn't make it. So I got a lot of life's experience on that boat.
And how has the environment changed? I mean, you've spent a career in the Coast Guard. Nobody spends more time in the polar regions than the Coast Guard did. You've had more tours on icebreakers in your career as well, going back to Antarctica. What are some of the changes that you've seen over the decades in these areas?
Well, so I've been in the Coast Guard for almost 40 years now. So it's been a lot of ice beneath the keel, you might say. I was on the Polar Star also. And I think, if you look at the ice cap in the Arctic, there's obvious science research that shows the warming trend there and the melting of the ice during the summer. If you go to the Antarctic, you have another set of data. You go to the Great Lakes, you see another set of data. So I'm not going to be the data scientist on all that, but certainly what I've seen consistently over those 40 years is increasing, if anything, an increasing need for icebreakers of all things. Just because it is melting in the summer doesn't mean you don't need to be having icebreakers. In fact, the more need, because people are starting to use that without ice capability, and there's still lots of ice up there even in the summer. And in the winter, you have the freeze, and you have now recreation and commercial vessels trying to use that space. So we have an even greater need for icebreakers because of the change.
Admiral, thanks very, very much, and look forward to having you on again soon.
Well, thank you very much, Vago. It's been a real pleasure.